Hey there, guys. So, as you probably know, the current week in Brave Exvius is pretty empty. There's not much to do. So, what do we do during dead weeks? We make goofy tier list. So, in this tier list, I am going to be ranking the series boss battles and discussing them, etc. I will also be including the ones that Global has skipped. So there's going to be quite a few in here that if you're only a Global player, you've never gotten to experience. But I have done all of them through the JP server. So we're going to talk about all of them, whether Global got them or not. Now, it is important to note that this is strictly my opinions. And some of these rankings are going to be based very heavily on how I felt about the content when I did it the first time. So for a lot of these, I might be talking about how it was such a hard fight, etc. That's referring to when I very first did it, and for most of these, that's going to be when I very first did it on the JP server. So keep in mind, in general, content is just easier on Global, even if it's the exact same unchanged content. It's still usually easier on Global just because Global has access to overall better units, better gear, etc. So some of these, I might say it was a really hard even on day one, and you might have gone in there with a strong Global team and killed it really easily, and that wasn't really that hard. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So let's go through all of these, and these are, in general, ordered in their order of release. Also, for some of the sprites, you'll notice they didn't import very well. In the sprites, Ardyn's head is cut off in the little tier image. But anyway, you get the idea. So, first series boss battle was Neo X-Death. And this one, I am going to rank very highly. I think, honestly, even though I really did enjoy the fight, I think it's more like a decent and not... see, this is the thing. It was definitely very challenging, especially on the JP server. There was a lot of RNG involved, because during Phase 2, he's got an attack that ignores provoke, ignores cover, etc. And it's really, really hard, and most of the time, the strategy was to just guts it. And this is back during the time period when guts items were relatively rare. This is back when STMR moguls were a super, super limited resource. You didn't just drop an STMR mogul on anything. So, a lot of players didn't have 6 copies of Queen's STMR, stuff like that. So it was a pretty challenging fight. Overall, though, I don't think it quite measures up to the amazing tier. The soundtrack, and for the most part, the soundtracks are literally directly out of their base game. They did a really good job on soundtracks for series boss battles. So when I say the soundtrack wasn't really that great, I'm talking mostly about, I guess, the source material. And some of these have really cool soundtracks. Some of them just didn't have a good soundtrack. So yeah, as much as I enjoyed the X-Death battle, I don't think it was the best ever, but it was definitely good. It was definitely a really good fight in the upper levels, but not quite amazing tier. But I really enjoyed it. It was the first one. It introduced us to series boss battles, and it was just great. It was a really, really great encounter. Next one is, you know what? Whoops. That is, these sprites are really, really small for this tier list, and I had the sprites mixed up. That's Neo X-Death. This is Chaotic Darkness, the Final Fantasy Brave Exvius series boss battle for Season 1. That's going to go into the average tier. Now, the reason I'm putting it there is, now for most of these series boss battles, if you have the exact specific team lineup, you can negate the boss entirely. And Chaotic Darkness is one of those fights. Now, the fight was really, really cool. A lot of interesting mechanics. The AI was very, very well done. There's a lot of stuff going on. Very involved, very deep. The issue is, if you check off all those boxes, it does break down into a fight that is literally take 0 damage. You can negate everything, either with multiple sources of Nethicite, a provoker with evasion immunity, immunity on your party, cover a tank with like high resistances. There's ways to completely negate every single attack this boss does, and therefore, any fight that you can ever completely negate entirely to the point that it has zero risk whatsoever, that's a negative in my opinion. It's cool that we can do that, but at the end of the day, that makes the fight very non-threatening. So even though Chaotic Darkness was a mechanically complex and interesting boss with a very, very cool AI, a lot of stuff going on per turn, a lot of thresholds, a lot of threshold attacks, the issue is if you just check off the box, like, I forget these specifics, but like, a 400% dark resist, evasion provoking tank with 3 stacks of Nethicite and death immunity, etc., then everything the boss does is shut down and there's no threat whatsoever, and I don't like that. But I'm putting it in average because the fight was overall well designed. Emperor is gonna... I want to put it in amazing just because I have very, very fond and frustrating memories about this, especially from the JP server. So this is one where it got a lot of hype on Global before it came out, talking about how hard it was, how ridiculous it was, and then it came to Global, and I don't remember the unit at the time, but I do remember when it came to Global, myself and lots of players used some meta global unit. I don't know who it was, probably Esther or something. And the fight was like, that's it? I thought this was so hard. And it was so hard on the JP server when you didn't have overpowered units. But on global, I forget who it was. It was probably Esther or Zeno or some kind of powerful global exclusive that people used, and the fight was a joke, and it was like, this is very overrated. Well, if you had done it, I guess on the JP server without those powerful units, it was really hard, and I really have fond memories of the Emperor fight because it was very, very hard. And this is one where you cannot negate everything. There are attacks that get through. It's very dangerous. It hit really hard. You needed a crazy tank, and you needed really high DPS to be able to get through the healing and all that kind of stuff. And again, on global, it was easy. On the JP server, without those powerful units, it was pretty hard. But still, the fight was well designed, and I enjoyed it. I'm going to put it in the decent tier. Kefka, I've talked about this very recently in a video, and this is kind of the video that gave me the idea, or that video gave me the idea to make this video, is talking about the old series boss battles and the fond memories of Kefka. I think I'm going to put Kefka in literally the best series boss battle we've ever had. It was amazing. And I will admit, there could be some bias here, some, rose-colored nostalgia glasses. I really enjoyed Final Fantasy VI, and it is very, very nostalgic for Final Fantasy VI. You've got the 3 Warring Triads fights, I forget their names. One of them is like Goddess. I forget the names. There's the 3 Warring Triads. You fight them first, the 3 statues. As you ascend up there, then you get to the top of the statue, and then Kefka is in his god form from, absorbing the gods of magic, whatever. And you've got, like, the heaven-covered background, the corrupted Kefka. The soundtrack is amazing. It's literally the Dancing Mad soundtrack, one of the coolest songs in all of Final Fantasy. Soundtracks, there's actually no lyrics. But, yeah, and the fight was ridiculously hard. It was so hard at the time of being done. And if you ever want to see me struggle on a fight really hard, I recorded my first ever clear on the JP server, and it was an epic clear. It's still on my channel. You can go back 5 years if you want to find it. But my JP clear on Kefka with Bartz, and for those that don't know, the 7-star Bartz had his long setup time. If he dies, you're really set back. And my Bartz and the friend Bartz, we died in phase 3. Then I resurrected them, and it's one of the most memorable fights I have ever done on Brave Exvius. Is that JP clear of Kefka series boss battle when Bartz was dying in phase 3, and we just couldn't recover, but I still did recover, and we limped through and got a win. It was awesome. It was amazing, amazing. Soundtrack was great. The fight, very, very complicated. You absolutely cannot negate everything because that hyperdrive stuff is ridiculous. The damage is crazy, etc. And here we go once again. Unfortunately, on global, it was kind of like an OTK fight. Because Global had power creep so far at that point that Kefka was like a joke. Now the issue with Kefka is when you threshold him, he doesn't do anything on that turn. You basically get a free turn. And on Global, the units were so powerful that you could literally jump from 100 to 50. The boss would do a threshold, and then he wouldn't do anything. You could then jump from 50 to 20, the next HP lock. The boss would do a buff and wouldn't do anything, and then you could jump from 20 to dead. So people on Global using really, really powerful units, they just literally stun locked the boss from 100 to dead. The boss never did anything, and people probably were like, this was a fun fight. Nothing happened. Well, let me tell you, if you were not powerful enough to stun lock the boss from threshold to threshold to threshold to dead, and the boss actually got to do his turns, you were in for a challenging encounter. And it was amazing. It was amazing. And here's Ardyn, where unfortunately the import of his sprite messed up and his head got cut off. I'm not going to spend the time to fix it. I'd have to resize the sprite, whatever. So Headless Ardyn, he's going to absolutely go into boring tier. And again, I will definitely admit, some of these may completely just be bias and nostalgia talking. I didn't play Final Fantasy 15, but I have been in the Brave Exvius community, and I do know that people keep saying Ardyn, one of the best Final Fantasy villains of all time. So they probably think Ardyn is amazing. I didn't play 15. I don't know anything about Ardyn. So everyone's saying, oh, he was such an amazing character. Well, I don't have that nostalgia leading me. But I will say, even if he was a great character, his fight was not fun at all. It was boring. It was boring. It wasn't like irritating. It was just literally boring. So once again, he has the problem of the chaotic darkness, where you can negate basically everything. I forget the specifics, but it's like you need an evasion magical tank with dark resist or something. I forget. And if you give them re-raise, your tank will die. So I guess you're not technically negating everything, but the tank will die in re-raise. And the fight is completely non-threatening. Nothing will ever happen. As long as you re-raise your tank every turn, it's complete immunity. And it's a joke, and it's not hard, it's easy, and unlike Chaotic Darkness, who at the very least had a very interesting AI, if you look at the AI for Ardyn, it's like, use an AoE in turn. Use 3 single target physical attacks in turn. Like, he doesn't do anything. It's the most boring fight, maybe not the most boring, but it's a very, very boring fight. It's a terrible fight. It's just a garbage encounter. They put no effort into doing that. So everyone that said Ardyn was the greatest Final Fantasy villain ever, unfortunately, Brave Exvius did not translate that well at all into a boss encounter. He's a terrible encounter. Chaos is... How do we rank Chaos? I guess we're going to rank him in average because on the whole, his fight is pretty interesting. It's just so easy, so easy. I've talked about it before, how at a certain point in JP, the developers started just like not caring anymore and making boring, easy encounters. So the thing is, Chaos is not technically boring. The encounter is pretty interesting. If you go and look at the AI, there's a lot going on. There's like a ton of attack. I think he has one of like the biggest skill sets of all these bosses. He's got like 40 different skills by memory. It's crazy. The issue is because he came right after Emperor. Remember how hard I said Emperor was? Emperor was extremely hard in JP. Most people just could not win because the boss heals, and they literally could not win in JP, and they just gave up. And then Chaos came next, and the developers did the usual thing. Is because everyone complained how hard Emperor was, they made Chaos's, his stats so abysmally low. So even though his encounter design was awesome, it feels like they definitely designed him before Emperor came out. He was ready to go. It feels like because people complained so hard about Emperor, they left the fight interesting and mechanically complex on Chaos, but they just took his, I'm just going to make up a number, his defense, his attack, his magic from 30,000 down to 5,000. They just took a sledgehammer to his stats, and he became the biggest joke ever. He does no damage. You don't even need a tank. You can just ignore his attacks. They tickle. They do nothing. The boss is squishy. It's a huge joke of an encounter. But I'm going to put him in average just because he was very obviously a well-designed encounter before they clearly nerfed the stats before releasing it because people complained too much about the Emperor SBB. But the fight was well-designed, so he's going into average. Zeromus. How do we rank Zeromus? So here is another one that I'm going to have a little bit of nostalgia bias because Final Fantasy IV, I enjoyed it, and it is pretty faithful to the Final Fantasy IV encounter with the black hole. The black hole in Final Fantasy IV was a buff remove. Yes, dispels did exist 30 years ago in Brave Exvius. In Final Fantasy. And yeah, Zeromus would remove your buffs with black hole. He was, overall not really that hard of a final boss, just to be completely honest here. But the fight was designed well in the spirit of Zeromus. And I'm going to put him in decent. And again, this could very easily just be nostalgia, giving him a higher than needed score. Because honestly, the fight wasn't that hard. If you remember on Global when it came out, I made a video using like 3 units to get all missions. I used, I think, Cecil, Rosa, and Rydia, maybe? Not Rydia. Kain. I don't know. I did a very like meme Final Fantasy IV only 3-man clear or 4-man clear because the fight was really easy. But it's probably just nostalgia. I really enjoyed the faithfulness of their translation of Zeromus. Now, I do wish we would have had the preamble with Zemus. Zemus before Zeromus, kind of like Kefka. Kefka, they really went all out for the faithfulness. They did the whole Warring Triad. It's a 4-stage fight, etc. Same thing with Exdeath. Exdeath was, again, the early form of Exdeath, then it changes form into the final form. It feels like they kind of stopped putting all that effort in for later bosses. Like, this one should have absolutely been a phase 1 of Zemus, and then it should have turned into Zeromus. But instead, we're getting just Zeromus. But even so, I'm putting it in decent tier. Braska's Final Aeon. How do we rank this? It's definitely gonna be a low rank. I guess it's almost like the boring tier, but I think we're gonna put it in the average tier just because. I don't know. The fight was not good, not interesting, but it did have. Oh no, you could negate everything, huh? Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I remember it hit really hard and like it was hard to tank, but now that I remember, if you skip the tank entirely and used multiple sources of Mirage, like either 3 or 2 stack Mirage, then the boss doesn't do anything at all. So I guess it's going to have to go into the boring tier because of that. Yeah, because the boss is not interesting. It's not hard. It's pretty easy. And you can negate everything the boss does, and it's just like a dull encounter. And even though I did enjoy Final Fantasy X, I consider this boss kind of similar to Necron, where like through the whole game you're fighting Sin, and Sin is not the real final boss. It spoilers. Technically, it kind of is in a way, the whole Yu Yevon thing, but whatever. I don't know. I didn't like the way Braska's Final Aeon just like all of a sudden is the final boss, but whatever. Honestly speaking, the same complaint can be said for Zeromus, because the whole game Golbez is the bad guy. Then the very last 5 minutes, Zeromus was the real bad guy. I guess Final Fantasy does that pretty often, don't they? Anyway, we're gonna just put Braska. I mean, it was boring. It wasn't a great encounter. It really wasn't. Vlad. This is not technically the sprite for Vlad, but the Vlad sprite in game is actually literally just that little blue crystal, and all the heads of Vlad are a static background. So the sprite itself is just that crystal. So we're using this instead. But I'm gonna put the Vlad fight in decent. Honestly, it was a pretty good encounter. It wasn't really challenging. It was pretty easy, but it was really interestingly designed. It had thresholds. It had the phase 2 where you had to hit him with like 3 ice attacks and 3 fire attacks to bring down his shield for 1 turn to get a burst turn in. And again, all these mechanics most global players never saw because you just kill the fight with overpowered units. But it was a really well-designed fight. Also, it had a really not secret, but a special Easter egg built into the fight where the whole thing with Vlad is his power of solitude, etc. And did you know if you go to the Vlad series boss battle with one single unit on your party, a solitary unit, the fight changes. Vlad will say something, I forget the exact quote, but Vlad will, it's a really cool Easter egg. If you go in there with one unit, Vlad will use a different emote and he will say something along the lines of, I see you've embraced the power of solitude, because you're going in with one unit. And then the fight, he won't use his special buffs that he uses. The only way to stop those buffs is by fighting him with one unit. It's a really cool mechanic. It's not worth doing, obviously, because it's still, better to bring a 6-man party. But it's just a really cool Easter egg they threw in there, and I love that so much. So I'm putting him in decent, but the fight itself was still too easy to put in the amazing tier. Shadow Lord is gonna be, I guess, average. I mean, it was an easy fight. Again, most of the series boss battles after Emperor are pretty easy. So we can't, for the most part, we can't say they were hard, but it was interesting. Shadow Lord with the swaps between physical and magical immunity. I found that interesting. I'm calling it interesting today. I said it was irritating back when I did it because, this is back when mages were absolutely trashed here. Mages were useless for years and years of Brave Exvius, and then Shadow Lord would go physical immune, and you have to bring mages because he's immune to physical. But yeah, so overall, average fight. It was fine. Not anything super memorable. It was just, a cool idea, but just not that much going on other than his physical and magical immunity swapping. How do you say this? Rurserin Arbiter? I'm gonna call him the Arbiter. The Arbiter. Honestly, it's almost a boring encounter. I'm gonna put him in average just for the fact that it's an interesting idea. So he's got his, he's very resistant to everything by default. And then every few turns, he will send an emote saying, I'm going weak to an element, either fire, ice, or lightning. And then the next turn, he will imperil himself by 800% to one of those elements, his breakpoint. The issue with that is, because it imperils him so hard, you can literally OTK him with that element. So if he goes weak to fire and you hit him with a strong fire attack, you OTK him and you win the fight immediately. So therefore, I want to put him in boring because it's so ridiculously, stupidly easy if you use the right breakpoint. But the idea of the breakpoint is really cool. So I'm going to keep him in average just because I think it's a cool idea. They just went way too far with it. It should have been double damage or something, not 9 times extra damage. That's way too much. It's way too much. It allowed you to literally OTK him right away, and that made it too easy. But the idea is awesome, so he's going into average tier. Safer Sephiroth. Now, here's the thing. I do realize Safer Sephiroth just got a global exclusive NeoVisions tuned battle, and it's very hard for a lot of players. So do we rate around that, or do we rate it around his original release? Because his original release, if you remember, came a week before NeoVisions. And the issue was, he was tuned for 7 stars, and Tifa existed a week later. And you could just OTK him, or 2-turn kill him with Tifa. And that was pretty unfortunate, because it was a cool encounter. It's just he was so easy because he came literally at the very end of the NeoVisions era. Now, if we're going to rank him based on his new global version, honestly, it's the exact same fight. There has been no changes whatsoever to the global version of Sephiroth except for his stats. His stats have been adjusted for a NeoVisions encounter. And that's kind of right here the same thing with Chaos. Chaos had the same thing, but his stats were adjusted downwards and made him a joke. But it was a cool encounter. So Sephiroth, I guess, is going to go to the... We're going to like average it out. I would say based exclusively on his global version, it's a really cool fight. It's amazing tier. But because we have to go with the original as well, which would honestly be in boring tier because it's a one-turn kill or it's a two-turn kill, we're going to go for decent because it's a decent encounter. And again, just like Chaos, it's a very interesting encounter. It's honestly not that complex. Like every turn he does like 3 moves and that's it. So overall it's a very basic fight, but it's a interesting-ish kind of fight. So we're going to go in the decent tier. And now the rest of these, Global has skipped. These are all skipped series boss battles. Well, this one actually is technically not released yet. But the other 6 or 7 or whatever have been skipped on Global. But we're still going to talk about them. And now because these have never come to Global, I can only talk about them exclusively in terms of JP meta and JP power level. So we're not going to have the issue like Emperor where people used like Esther or whatever and it was a joke. Same thing with Kefka. These are all, I have only done them at their intended power level and meta level. So Cloud of Darkness, the Final Fantasy III one. Now the issue here again is a lot of these I haven't even looked at for like 5 years. They're so old. I've sort of forgotten some of them. So Cloud of Darkness, I would put her in the average tier. So the encounter honestly was not that super hard. It was kind of near to the Emperor stage where they were like starting to just make things kind of easy. And Cloud of Darkness was not super hard, but it was a decent encounter. It had a lot of cool abilities. The AI was complex. It was fleshed out. I didn't play Final Fantasy III, so I have no idea how faithful to the original encounter it was. But yeah, it was really cool. It was a cool encounter. Necron, I'm going to put him in the decent tier. That's actually a pretty cool encounter. Now, of course, there's the whole humbug about Necron is a stupid idea, talking about Final Fantasy IX, not Brave Exvius. From the original source, Final Fantasy IX, if you've played it, you know the whole drama with Necron. Everyone that's played Final Fantasy IX thinks Necron was the stupidest idea. It really undercuts the game as a whole. We're not going to include that in his rating as a boss encounter. So the boss encounter was actually pretty cool. He does his little neutron ring thing. He does his the feather thing. He does a lot of... It's really faithful to the fight itself. It's a cool encounter. It's challenging. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't put it in amazing, but it was still a very, very good encounter in Brave Exvius. I enjoyed it a lot. The battle stage and the music was very faithful to the game. It had the whole, I'm not sure how to describe it, like the inverted Colosseum background or whatever. Very, very awesome. But the fight itself, even though it was pretty challenging and it was sort of intricate, it just didn't leave that much of an impression on me, so I can't put it in amazing tier. Now, what's his name? Ultimate Weapon? It's not Ultimate Weapon. It's the Final Fantasy XIV series boss battle. Is it Ultimate Weapon? It might be Ultimate Weapon. He's going to go in amazing tier. He's going to go absolutely to amazing tier. This was probably my second favorite after Kefka, and it might even be tied with Kefka. Ultimate Weapon was amazing in Brave Exvius. That fight was super, super hard. Lots of RNG that you couldn't provoke. It would randomly kill people. It wouldn't randomly kill people. It would randomly do very, very powerful attacks on units. And if it chose a squishy DPS, it would have killed them. And again, this is mostly during an era where you didn't have 6 copies of Guts items. So you couldn't really gear your whole... I mean, some players could. But most players couldn't gear their whole party in Guts. It was uncommon back then. So Ultimate Weapon was very hard. And then it had a super amazing mechanic. Well, depending who you ask. The final phase in Phase 2, when you turn on his power-up, you had like either 4 or 5 turns to kill him after you activate it. Otherwise, he uses Ultima, and it's just a game over. It's an automatic game over. And I did play Final Fantasy XIV, not super hard, not hardcore, and I only played it casually, but I did play it enough to get to the point of fighting Ultima in a raid in Final Fantasy XIV. And this fight is really faithful to Final Fantasy XIV. It's really faithful. The music is similar. The attacks are very themed after it. In Final Fantasy XIV, he has that same thing where he stops and he starts charging this like Omega powerful auto kill attack. So the fight was incredibly well done. It was very challenging. It had great music. It had great thematic stuff. It was hard. It was fun. It was a great AI, and easily one of the best series boss battles ever. And it is a huge disservice that Global skipped it. So maybe Global can be awesome and bring it late as an upgraded like the Sephiroth one, and we can get it with hard stats, and it'll be amazing. Let me tell you, if Global is listening, if anyone on Global is listening, and you're thinking about, which is the next series boss battle we want to upgrade like Sephiroth, then please, either Ultima Weapon or Kefka. But honestly, probably Ultima Weapon, just because Global hasn't gotten it yet. It would be amazing. Now we have Orphan. Orphan is Final Fantasy XIII series boss battle. I didn't play Final Fantasy XIII, so I don't know anything about Orphan, so I can't tell you how faithful it was. This actually does have two forms. I'm only using the original sprite or the Stage 1 sprite. The Stage 2 sprite, when you kill Stage 1, it turns into like this, antique sun as a way to describe it. It's very strange looking. It's cool looking. We're using the Phase 1 sprite. I'm going to put it in decent. I mean, it was a pretty challenging encounter. I do recall this from the JP survey. It was pretty hard. I'm going to put it up there in decent. It was a pretty hard fight. What didn't do like anything super amazing, like the the Ultima Weapon or Kefka. Like Ultima Weapon is slamming your team with like the power of wind from the Garuda invoke, or the seismic smash from like the Titan invoke, or the fire ring from the Ifrit invoke. Like all that kind of stuff is super awesome on this. And then Kefka has like all the music going on and the scenery and the challenge level. Well, Orphan, I mean, again, this could be because I didn't play 13. I have no nostalgia at all, and maybe that would bump it up. But overall, it was a good fight. It was a good fight. I enjoyed it. Challenging, not that challenging. Honestly, it wasn't that intricate either. The boss only does like 3 things per turn, but still, it was a good fight. Ultimecia is going to have to go down to average, even though Ultimecia, it was a cool encounter. It really suffers from the same thing as these two, where it's possible to basically negate almost everything the boss does. Now, you did need 3 stacks of Nethicite to negate her, because Ultimecia will use triple, and that's like a callback to Final Fantasy VIII. If you remember Final Fantasy VIII, using triple from, I think, the Cerberus GF or whatever, allows you to triple cast magic. Ultimecia uses triple and then triple cast some magic. The problem is it can be Nethicited, and that really shuts her down super hard. So because Nethicite just totally shuts down Ultimecia, we're going to have to put her down to average tier. Yeah, the fact that you can just negate the boss is always a downside. Other than that, the fight was pretty interesting. It was kind of cool. It wasn't that great, honestly. This was an average fight. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. The Undying, also known as Vayne, the Final Fantasy XII final boss. So this one, it's not related to the fight itself, but it really pissed me off because it's the Final Fantasy XII series boss battle. Okay, get this: Final Fantasy XII series boss battle. Vaughn was the Final Fantasy XII big banner unit. Vaughn, the new overpowered breaker back in the 7-star days. And then they put out a series boss battle that is immune to breaks. It's like it was the stupidest decision. Like, the developers had this total disconnect from the marketing team. It's like you're selling this great breaker of Vaughn, and I pulled for him, And then you release the 12 boss battle for you to showcase your new Vaughn, and the boss is immune to breaks. It was the dumbest decision they've ever made about series boss battles. But putting that aside, it was a pretty good fight. It really was. So we're gonna put it in decent. It was challenging. It wasn't that challenging, so we can't go into amazing tier. I don't remember the music in it, so that probably tells you all that needs to be said, is that it was not memorable. But it was a good fight. It was a good fight. Putting aside the whole, middle finger to Vaughn, his own serious boss battle, it was a good fight. It was fun. I liked it. And then High Seraph Ultima. So you might have heard me talk about this before. This is one that got released during the Final Fantasy Tactics Neovisions era event. Now the issue here is this boss is tuned with the same stats as the rest of these bosses that are all designed for 7-star units. They released this like 4 years or 3 years into the Neovisions era with 7-star stats. So as you can imagine, it was literally a turn 1 OTK. Turn 1 OTK. That's it. And yeah, there is going to be our series boss battle ranking guide. Hopefully when Global brings this back out, when Global brings this back, or brings this to us, I should say, hopefully they adjust the stats like they did with Sephiroth, because literally what is the point of bringing a unit, or bringing a series boss battle that dies in turn 1? It just made no sense. It made no sense. Anyway, there's my list. So Kefka and Ultima Weapon, by far my favorite series boss battles. Exdeath, Emperor, Zeromus, Vlad, Sephiroth, Necron, Orphan, and Vayne. They were good. They were challenging. They had one or two little small nitpicks that keep them from the amazing tier, but they were still great fights, and I really enjoyed them. As far as the others, Chaotic Darkness, Chaos, Shadow Lord, Rurson, Cloud of Darkness, and Ultimecia, they were fine. The problem is they were, for the most part, too easy. All of these, well, most of these are relatively easy. Not all of them, but most of them are relatively easy. So, but still, when you're super easy and you're just no threat whatsoever, but you're a cool fight, you go into the average tier. And then boring tier would be Ardyn, Braska, and Ultima. It's just too much. They were too easy to shut down. No challenge, no memory, whatever. So there it is. There's my list for series boss battles. Hope it's been interesting to listen to. And Global, please, please, please bring more of these, like they did with Sephiroth, because that was awesome that Global did that. So I'd really love to see some more of these updated for Neo era. Okay, see you in a bit.